Okay, I hope you can see my screen.
Right. Yes, doctor, we can.
Okay. So today we want to look at, first of all, many apologies before I begin. Many apologies for yesterday. I had a line of meetings yesterday. I hoped I would be done by the time of our lecture, but that wasn't the case. So many apologies for that. And also on the last Saturday, I unceremoniously got offline. The network completely failed me. So apologies for that. So today we want to look at ICT policy. The previous week we looked at ICT strategy, and I think we've had quite a lengthy discussion on strategy itself. Strategy are those actionable things that we can do to change our current position from where we are and where we want to go. So they are wishes, they are more or less like wishes, and it's a plan. It's a wish and it's a plan. Now, policy, on the other hand, operationalizes the strategy. And we're going to see what it is. So first things first, what is policy? Okay, what is policy? I don't know if any of you have taken time to look at what is online, the content online. Has anyone taken time to look at the content online?
Yes, some of it.
Okay. So I think even you find there's a sample policy there as well. Eh? So when you look at what policy is, it can mean different things depending on the context. We first hear about policy from the government perspective. There could be a policy on ICT, a policy on this or that, but basically for government, you look at it's that the basic principles by which a government is guided on a certain issue, how to handle a certain issue, how to handle a certain sector, and so on and so forth. So in it, you have declared objectives that the government or party seeks to achieve. So that's what essentially a policy is at government level and at organizational level. Okay? So even at organizational level, it is still a set of principles which guide with guidelines. And its purpose is to enforce, it's formulated and enforced by the governing body. So a department gets up and sets up a strategy and policy, then hands it over to the governing body to approve. Now, later on, this governing body uses these strategies and policies to evaluate the performance of a department or the organization, uses that policy itself. So at government level and at organizational level, it comes to the same thing. The definition is the same. We also hear policy in terms of insurance. So in terms of insurance, this is a contract between the one who is insured and the insurer. So it's a terms of contracts. So for example, if you have a health policy, it's agreed that you pay this amount of money every month, and we should be able to cover A, B, C, D, L medical needs. So it's in terms of insurance, it has a different meaning. So we're going to take the meanings that are covered by government and by organizations. That's the meaning that we want to look at. So in this case, we are looking at a method of action that is selected by an organization. So you have a method that has been selected. You have other alternatives, but you have a method that you've selected. And you say, these are the things I'm going to do to achieve my strategic objectives. So the policies are made and implemented in the same way that decisions are made. So a policy will state, for example, that in case we get a new employee, We must train the employee on ABCD. Yeah. If it's an HR policy, we'll say that the HR policy may state we have positions ABCD. Position A requires an individual with such and such qualifications. And this will be their salary scale, and these will be their roles and duties. So when a person is being employed, they look for the criteria that the position held. And when the person is hired, they'll let them know these are your basic duties and responsibilities. And then they'll say, once you carry out these duties, you will be remunerated in this way. So that's what an HR policy would do. So now think in terms also of ICT. It comes in the same way. You make a decision and you say, these are the systems that we shall have. And once we have these systems, this is how we shall handle our data that is connected to it. This is who will have access to it. This is who will not have access to it. These are the systems, communication systems. This is who will have access to it. This is who will not. And how will they use it? So basically guiding the user and those who are governing on how things must be done. So the policy is they are coherent decisions which have a long-term benefit or long-term purpose. The objective of having these policies is to see that you have an achieved objective at the end of the day. So again, pointing back to strategy, because you have that long-term objective. What is that objective that this policy is helping you achieve? So we already said policies are either at national or organizational level, and some go even as low as even departments. So why have ICT policies? Why have them? Well, we have IT resources. And these IT resources, we had already outlined them at the very beginning when we had our previous sessions, what IT resources are. So IT resources include the systems, the information, the personnel, the infrastructure, and so on and so forth. We want that when these systems are put, they are put there to do exactly why, for the purpose for which they were implemented. If you have internet systems to provide internet services to users, you want to ensure that these resources are used exactly for that purpose and not for anything outside of that purpose. That you achieve your strategic objectives. So you want to avoid abuse. 2 is ownership of information. Information is one of the most important assets of an organization. One of the most important assets. So I'll give you an example. If I asked any of you, what would be your most important information asset for your organization? As ICT, we should have that knowledge. What's your most important asset? I remember one time as head ICT, we were pointing out certain things that were pointing out certain systems that we felt were not of benefit or were a risk to the university. And I asked management, what is the most important information asset we have? The most important information that we must protect. That is the results. Students come to UMU to gain a degree. So to gain that degree, someone must have sat for coursework and exams, and therefore results must be present. If those results are tampered with, you can easily destroy what provides revenue to the university. You remember, I think some of you may have remembered the story that happened at Chambogo when results for a certain number of students disappeared simply because the university had fallen out with the third-party organization that was keeping the results. So that information asset is important to protect. Yeah. The employees, who are the employees? Remember, if you looked at, again, we go back to our definition of ICT. what makes up a system, what makes up ICT systems. People are part of those systems. And those employees must be protected. Yeah? They must be protected as they use these systems. The minute you go online, the minute you have resources of employees or even your clients' information, anything can happen. It can be easy, anything can happen, and it can be used to compromise the integrity of an employee or even tarnish their names. So ICT policies are there to protect those users. 4 is for decision making. I think that's part and parcel of the definitions we've seen. So the policies guide decision making, especially for the ICT department and also users. They know exactly how and why they should use ICT as they are using ICT. If you're using email, how should I use email? What kind of communication should I make using the organization's email platform? How should I use it? If I'm using a company laptop, for what purpose? If I find myself putting personal information on a company laptop and that personal information lands in the wrong hands, what happens? For ICT, it is to know, guides them on how to advise management on any new service you're taking on. If it's going to carry sensitive organizational information, if it's going to be compromised. So it gives ICT a guideline on how to advise management. Integrating corporate governance. This one is extremely key because it's on policies that the governing body evaluates management on their performance. You'll even notice that policies come into play when auditing is being done, especially even ICT policies. They are asked for by auditors to know how information is protected, how resources are protected, how risk is mitigated, especially for information assets, how risk, if you have any risk protocols to protect data. Those are key points. Finally, is to meet regulatory and legal and ethical requirements. As we go along the way, we shall realize that ICT policies are heavily influenced, especially when it comes to information security. They are heavily influenced by national regulatory acts and policies, legal Information Act, for example, the Uganda's Privacy and Protection Act heavily influences ICT policies because it guides on what information is private, what is protected, what is public. So any policy, while it's being formulated, the national legal frameworks that influence must be remembered. So where do ICT policies fit within an organization? Where do they fit? We have already seen some of these in the little we have discussed so far. In governance description. So these ICT policies are used by board of directors to evaluate, to direct, guide, and monitor. So normally, when you're seated on a board, policies and procedures really matter. You want to know what is the set policy on, for example, how we do procurement, on how we sell or dispose of assets, and so on and so forth. So also in terms of ICT, what is required? Two, it provides a guideline on policies and procedures. So those who are actually carrying out they are operationalizing ICT. It provides a set of procedures. Even a policy can even go down as far as providing a procedure on how to back up data, just that or how to set up firewall and so on and so forth. It can even guide the customer care services the ICT department gives to the organization. Just as far as that, providing procedures and even reaching a point of protecting ICT in case somebody complains that I wasn't given X, Y, and ABCD type of services. If ICT has clear policies and procedures and documents, they can clearly state, this is what I did, and this is the conclusion I came up with. It also helps to give a uniform result every time. In ICT management, it's used to implement business objectives. So here, the ICT policy normally should be developed in line with business objectives. So you set up your ICT policy to guide the overall business objectives, or what would have been set up by the ICT strategy, sorry. So normally the ICT policy is developed after the ICT strategy, or together. They're developed at the same time together. So this is where the management description comes in. So here we have a picture giving us a guideline of our ICT policies. At the very center, you have the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, who sits together with management. Now, together with management and his or her department, the CIO develops the IT policies, which would have been developed, which would have been guided by the overall company policies and procedures. So we already see that it's connected to the overall company policies and procedures, which would have been developed together with the company strategy. So already we can see the link together with the strategy. Then you have your governing body, your board of directors. So the board of directors would have approved these policies, and then they use them to monitor management, of which the CIO is part of. So let me first stop there and ask, do you have any question or comment?
Thank you, Doctor. I have a question.
Yes, please.
Is the policy supposed to be that detailed? Because the ones we have seen from our organizations, they are more like guidelines. Is it supposed to even talk about backups and all that?
Yeah, if the procedure, that would be a procedure, not the policy. A procedure can be a policy which can go that far.
So it's just talking everything in general terms,
yes,
not detail.
Yes, not in general terms, but not in detail. Now you have the policy, then you have the procedures. For example, you may have a manual on procedures for backup, on procedure for handling ICT service needs. For example, take an example. If you have an ICT department, your customers would essentially be your users. And as an ICT department, daily you'd receive your customers or your user requests for service. For example, my laptop is down, or anything like that. You may have a procedure internally on documentation. Let's say who received the call, at what time, who visited, and so on and so forth, and how it was handled. What was the diagnosis, how it was handled. That one becomes part of your documented, it's a procedure on how you handle. Now, once an ICT person follows it, number one, it ensures that any ticket opened is closed. A ticket would be a complaint, a request for service, whatever it is. That it has been opened and it has been closed, so that your ICT department is also evaluated on those procedures. When the ICT department follows it, the ICT department can clearly demonstrate, we have this procedure for following complaints and or rather requests for service, and this is how we follow them up, and this is how many we've closed in the year. So you maybe have received X amount of tickets, and you've closed Y number of tickets, and you demonstrate your percentage of closure of tickets. So just following that procedure, you may not state what exactly you did, but that procedure, because you have that procedure, which would be supported by a particular policy, that procedure helps in evaluation. I don't know, Andrew, if I answer your question.
So it has also brought another question. Are we supposed to have another document for procedures?
Yes, some
which
companies do. Some companies do, especially if you see that you need it. If it's a large organization that really needs procedures set out for the ICT department, do it. Why? ICT is also is accountable. Because you're providing a service, it's accountable for its procedures. That's one. Two, ICT is also audited, heavily audited. I'll give you an example. ICT people who work in banks, yeah? Say an employee leaves a bank, and banks, employees have access to systems which have access to sensitive information. We all agree, access to people's accounts on how much somebody has, how much money somebody has, transactions, so on and so forth. Those are quite sensitive. So imagine you have systems within the bank, you have employees of the bank, these employees leave, and ICT must have a procedure, not so, Andrew, a procedure on deactivating or removing access to systems. So if those procedures are not followed, you can imagine if auditors come and they find somebody in the system still has access and that person is no longer an employee. Do you see the repercussions that can be there?
Yes, I see.
Yeah, so it becomes prudent that let us say, if there's a policy for the bank, for the ICT department on access to systems, there should be a procedure on giving access and then a procedure on deactivating access, so that any ICT person can clearly follow that procedure and even document, so that when they're being audited, there's a clear transparency. I don't know if you follow me on that. There's a policy on access, and then there's a procedure on giving access and a procedure for deactivating. Yes, Stephen.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just to throw more light, a policy is basically a deliberate plan of action that is given by management. Now, when management gives you a guideline on what is expected of you in terms of delivery of ICT, then you as an IT officer or the person who is implementing the policy goes down to break down into smaller actionable items that will achieve the bigger objective that is in the policy. I'll give an example. If we have a password policy, it's going to be high level as a policy signed off by management. Now, you in your implementation is where you go into the nitty-gritty details of defining the password length, expiration, the do's and don'ts, and all that. So the policy is usually a bit high level and management level. And then when it comes to the action, the IT department breaks it down into smaller bits that can be applied. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for that clarification. So I think we have all understood what policies and procedures. I think Stephen has given us a much detailed explanation on that. So I think we can move on. So what would we expect in ICT policies? Now, the ICT policy itself is, the document itself contains sub-policies which cover which tend to cover these three main areas. Yes, these three main areas. Now, someone might say, oh, but I've seen a policy with a password policy, a policy on this and that, on a policy on acceptable use and so on and so forth. All of those can be can generically fall under these three areas generically. Now, if I don't know if any of you has ever seen a policy, an ICT policy, but I think from some of you, like Stephen has already talked about password policy and so on and so forth, or that would be under security. So all of those can generically fall under these three, if we were to think about it closely. So let's just have a look. An employee joins a company. In that company, when they get a contract, they will receive certain policies which they must sign off. So, for example, an employee will be told, you'll be given access to our email system. To use our email system, you must adhere to ABCD, acceptable use policy. For example, you will not use the email for your personal businesses or anything like that, personal communications. You'll not use it you'll not abuse it, you'll not pass information that is unacceptable to the organization. Maybe it could be terrorist related or connected to pornography or anything, or it's anything that may be an organization that is religious founded or anything that is blasphemous or something like that. So a policy will clearly outline, the contract will include the policy that the person must adhere to. So already in that contract, if we're talking about email system, we are already including acceptable use policy. Now, already in hidden part, there should be also a training policy, because if there's a new employee, this new employee must be trained on the new system or systems that they will use. If it's an accounting system, email, whatever it is, they will be trained on how to use it. And then also there may be other policies on not passing this information to other people. If it's, for example, accounts, not passing on information about salaries or things like that. So the employee's contract would include that. And by default, also would include, let me just go back, would include the training. It would imply that there must be a training part of it. It may not be part of the contract, but there's an implication that there's need for training. So let's look at some of these policies. The first is the training policy. Now, the mere fact that we have systems, it means there must be training on policy, on systems that are there. So part and parcel of the ICT policy should be a training policy. And this would indicate who is eligible for training. It could be, and this may go, there are organizational systems. So for example, you have email systems, which everyone in the company should have access to. So that would include every employee. Then you have departmental systems. For example, if you have an accounting system that should only be accessed by the accounts department, the members of the accounts department must be trained on how to use it. There may be systems that are accessed only by marketing and sales. Likewise, we also indicate in the same manner. So this is where we indicate who is eligible, when these trainings can be conducted. So for example, the policy may indicate for new employees, or you may have periodic trainings, or there may be new systems. So once a new system is brought in, there must be training for that. So here the training for specific jobs, this would be departmental or something that is sensitive to a particular department. You also indicate the type of training that you have, whether it is online, whether it is in-house, or you you need somebody who must come and give training from outside. That must also be catered for. Those who are responsible for monitoring the training, that training is actually done, and after training is done, that that somebody actually did pick up and is using the system appropriately. You also indicate where funds must come from for training. So while writing this policy, you must be aware of certain things. For example, the staff abilities. Do they have ICT skills or not? And so on and so forth. And not just of the system itself, but just basic ICT skills. Then you must also have an understanding of what it means to have in-house training or external training. Do you have the capacity to do in-house training? You may be a large organization with a small IT department that would not be able to provide that kind of training. Or if you do, if it's large and a small department, you may decide to say, let us have a mix and match, e-learning, in-house, and maybe external. So all these things must be taken into consideration. Do we have any question before we move to the next policy? If not, let's move on. Now, for this one is connected to your second assignment. I've already put it up on Moodle. You are, I think, now doing your first assignment, which involved developing an ICT strategy for Clarion School for Boys. Now, the next assignment is developing an ICT training policy. You can start by brainstorming on what the training policy will be in relation to your ICT strategy. So begin by looking at that. There are already a number of gaps that the case study highlights. So I hope those gaps, you identified them as part of your assignment. So the training policy is a key part of whatever strategy you may have put up, because there's also a clear indication that there's a need for an ICT training policy. So these are just some guidelines you can use to do your assignment, but just have a look at them and then use them for your discussion. Let's move to the next policy, security policy. So here, when we look at security here is quite generic, and it can be drilled down further into information security. So here, when we're looking at the security policy, we're looking at how we can protect the organization's information assets, which means you should have a clear understanding of the information assets you currently have and those you intend to attain in the future. Remember, again, the policy is a living document just like the strategy, and its objective is to achieve the strategic objectives that have been identified. So what are those information assets that you have that need protection? So you should have a clear knowledge of those information assets that you have. Then it should have procedures that employees must follow in order to protect those information assets from theft, from misuse, and unauthorized access. So it should also cover security and privacy of data. So now let me also state, under this policy, the security policy, you may find someone has data security or information security, anything depending on the need of the organization. Again, the policies are formulated based on your ICT strategy, what you have. So what you have is what you develop. What you have is what you develop, the policy that is needed. So the security policy should be able to identify the threats to data that exist or that have been identified, that or you foresee. they should have been, those potential threats should have been identified. Not just what once happened, but what are the potential threats that could exist. Then you allocate responsibilities for data security. Responsibilities for data security. That means, what are the responsibilities of the organization itself? What are the responsibilities for the organization itself as far as protection of data? Here, what do I mean? If we have, let's say, one important information information asset that we have is information on employees. Information on employees must be protected. That's one. You also have your customer information. For example, UMU's customer information, our customers are our students. So we as UMU, the UMU ICT department must be aware that there's employee information, and there's also student information. All of these the university is responsible for them. Now, let us say UMU gets this data and gets a third party to store this information. Okay? A third party to store information on students and staff. And then this third party is compromised. Their ICT infrastructure is compromised and people gain access to this data. Who pays? Who bears the consequence? Is it the third party or the university? Yes, please, Stephen.
I think in that case, it's a two-way. The university carries the primary responsibility for the protection of information.
Yes.
And I also want to believe that when the university gives you my information as a third party, you sign to certain clauses on how to protect the information.
Yes.
So if you fail on your part to protect, it is in one way a breach of contract.
Yes.
Especially that clause on protection for information. And also, UMU as a university is failing on the fact that they give this information to someone who is not able to protect that information. So depending on the access conditions through which the third party did access that particular information, it is where the responsibility lies. We've had a similar scenario at the Data Protection Office. I work with the Personal Data Protection Office. There was a breach. There was a breach of personal data at one of the organizations, and the breach happened at a third-party hosted logging server.
Yes.
Now, when we went into to do investigations as required by law, one first is to hold responsible the organization that has primary control over the data. Now, as the investigations went on, the organization said, no, look, we are in contract with so-and-so, and the breach happened at their premises. So the investigations going on, we requested for the contract between the two parties. Only to realize that there were no particular information security and data protection clauses included in the contract. So now that becomes the responsibility of the organization for not including the responsibility clauses in the contract. Now, on the other hand, the law, the data protection law is what I'm talking about now, holds you accountable for what you do or you do not do to protect the data that you have. Okay? So in that case, even the third party is held responsible for not doing anything to protect their data.
Yes.
So I think if you look at it from that angle, whenever you have access to sensitive information, you're responsible for it. And the person you give access to is also responsible. But as the primary user, you need to take the precaution and ensure at least you cover yourself on in terms of the non-disclosure and responsibility clauses within the contract.
Okay, I think Stephen has explained it very well. Now the key point is to note these guidelines must be there in the security policy, so that for the ICT department and management, they are fully aware that should I get into, if I choose to protect, if I choose to house my own data, I must take steps to protect this data. If I pick a third party, there must be, like Stephen is saying, there must be an agreement, a clear agreement between the organization and the third party on protection of that data, and that in case of a breach, where consequences lie. Because ultimately, like we gave the example of UMU. If a third party data is compromised, and the UMU carries the primary responsibility, okay? And it is now UMU's responsibility to have a strong contract between it and the third party to ensure that UMU is also protected. Because anything can happen. If, for example, if student data is mishandled, a student can get up and decide to sue the university. And that can be detrimental financially, and also in terms of the reputation of the university. So there must be allocation of responsibilities. Who is responsible for data security? And management must be aware. If firewalls must be put up, then they must be put up. If state-of-the-art technology must be used, then they must know. If you're going to use a third party, then hold the third party also accountable with a contract. So the policy, the security policy, states that. You also state that the staff members responsible for protection of information assets, the ICT department, the different department heads who are responsible for access and so on and so forth. These responsibilities must be laid out. And that's where the contract comes in for employees, where they sign on how they are responsible for which particular data. So that would guide the HR policy or the HR contract. This security policy would guide that. And of course, not to forget the disciplinary actions in case of breach of contract. So in a nutshell, this is what the ICT policy should have. One, it should have the overall objective and scope, what it should cover. It should have a statement from management supporting the principles. Then it should have the framework setting control objectives, that the different control objectives, objectives and controls that are there, and also includes a risk assessment and risk management. So that is what a security policy would include. Take time to just Google and see security policies that exist in ICT, the sample security policies that exist. Now, information security policy falls under the security policy, and you'll find most information security policies will reference the security policy. But key point in information security is that it references legislative and regulatory frameworks that exist within the nation, government or legislative acts that have been put up to guide security of information that is kept by any organization. That's one. Two, the objective of information security is to ensure continuity. So this is where we would see backup policy. under the information security, you'd have a backup policy. What your ICT policy states on backing up all organizational data, even when the data is held by a third party. So give here an example of a third party. Most organizations don't host their own websites. A third party hosts that website. There should be a contractual agreement on backup of website information in case anything happens. There should be that, and there should be clear procedures that it's properly done. I remember an incident when I was still head ICT, when the university website being hosted by RENU crashed, and then RENU realized that their backups had gaps in them. So that was an issue that we had to sort out together between RENU and UMU. But of course, that one is the website is one thing. There's also the very sensitive issues that come up, especially with data that is critical to any organization. So backup policy must exist, and a procedure should exist specifically on that. It should include the consequences of security violations. So any policy where there's violations, which has consequences, it should include the consequences, what should happen. Under the information security, we also have network security policies. These are the sub-policies that Stephen talked about earlier. So you already see under information security, we already have a backup policy. We have now security policy, usernames and passwords. You may have a policy on passwords and so on and so forth. Then you may have also procedures on how data should be transferred. What protocols should we use? The most secure protocols we should use for which particular type of data. There's some data that is so critical that encryption may be necessary. There's other data that may not be. So those are policies and procedures that you may indicate. Change policies, change control. There are systems that there are situations where you must have change management when you're changing from one system to another, or changing from basically changing from one thing to another. There should be also a policy on that, especially to look at risk management as far as that is concerned. Then you have the portable devices that come. You have company laptops. How should they be used? Who should use them? Who should be given access? Personal data being kept on it, and so on and so forth. Backup and recovery. This was basically under business continuity. So all of these would exist under information security. So one may decide, you may have one lump sum information security, but if something is really sensitive, you may decide to break it up and have a backup policy, a password policy, and so on and so forth. If your procedures are really sensitive, I would advise you break them up so that each policy guides the different ICT department personnel. Each section clearly guides on what must be done. So the information security policy is more detailed than the security policy because it's going down into the nitty-gritties of security itself. It's a little bit more detailed. Again, I would advise to go online and just do just Google sample of information security policies. You'll see something, you'll get an idea of what we're talking about. The third policy is procurement policy. Now, ICT is very much, we had spoken about this earlier. ICT and procurement go hand in hand. They really go hand in hand. And already, the procurement department may have its own policy. But the ICT department may need to develop a policy that is embedded or supplements the overall procurement policy of the organization. Why? Because ICT and procurement really go hand in hand. Here, you may want to, within the policy, you may want to indicate clearly the standards you have on hardware and software. What standards do you follow? Then once you follow those standards, you also indicate lifespan. For how long do you intend to keep or to use this technology, considering that ICT has a lifespan? Sometimes, most of the time, it's about 5 years. After 5 years, it may be a good idea to consider procuring new and improved hardware. So that already indicates you may have a procurement policy to indicate after how long do you intend to replace your hardware. That is one. Two, because of interoperability, you may also indicate that you may want to procure only systems that can maybe only certain types of systems. So for example, someone may want to focus on Cisco equipment, and others may decide to go with the Huawei, that's the Chinese brand. And so interoperability matters a lot in this situation. So this is where in your policy you indicate such guidelines. So in the policy, the procurement policy may also want to cover disposal. It may be part of it, or it may be another sub-policy. Why? If we know we have a lifespan of our technology, we must also indicate on how we dispose of that technology. Certain key points you may want to consider is now there are things now that are trending, or they are key in our current situation, things like the environment. So ICT purchases equipment that is not biodegradable, like switches, computers, and so on and so forth. How do you dispose of them? You may also want to indicate of how you dispose things in an environmentally friendly way. Key point also to note, some of these policies can also help in grant applications. You know, some donors are really sensitive on environmental issues. So if your policy indicates that you're sensitive about them, the policy can be a good selling point for you as you apply for some of these grants. So in a nutshell, that completes our topic on ICT policy development. Do we have any question so far on that topic? Do we have any question? Should I take silence means consent?
Yes, doctor, no question.
Okay, so maybe let me stop there. I leave you because I think on Saturday you have an assignment to hand in. Not so?
Yes, doctor, we do.
Yeah, and there's a new assignment up already for you. So let us stop there. Now, a key point to note, let me first just stop recording. A key point to note, I'll be traveling I'm in Kampala right now. So I'll be traveling